Okay, hello everyone, and thank you for joining us. This is episode 17 of the ACAD and COCA report. Our guest today is Wes Fisher, who is a board-certified internist, cardiologist, and cardiac electrophysiologist practicing in North Shore University Health System in Evanston, Illinois. He is a clinical associate professor of medicine at the University of Chicago Pritzker School of Medicine. For many years, he was known to tens of thousands of readers as simply Dr. Wes, the insightful and affable author of one of the very first medical blogs on the internet, first published in 2005. Since 2013, however, he has used his platform for activism, and the happy-go-lucky blogger has become a braveheart William Wallace fighting against the oppressive forces of the American Board of Medical Specialties. He now leads various initiatives aimed at shaking down the system of regulatory capture that rules the board certification process and holds hostage thousands of disenfranchised physicians. Wes, welcome to the show. We are delighted to have you.
I am thrilled to be here. Thank you so much.
So, Wes, most people in the audience, I think, are going to be familiar with the battle that you're waging. But for those who are not, I will ask you to give us, a 2 to 3 minute synopsis of what's at stake. But before you do that, can you tell us what board certification is about? Since some people may confuse it with licensing, with medical degrees, or with whatever else we hang on our walls, in the doctor's office.
Sure. Board certification is really a medical accolade, and that's about it. It's not required for you to practice medicine. It is not required for licensure, but it is an advertising means for physicians to show others that they have a fairly healthy fund of knowledge after they complete their residency program. So that's really all it is. The problem is that it's morphed into a bigger beast lately.
Okay, so tell us a little bit how that came about.
Well, I think in the first American Board of Internal Medicine with whom I'm affiliated was created in 1936, and for the first larger portion of its existence, it basically issued certificates that showed that doctors could pass a test and had an adequate fund of knowledge to practice in their particular specialty within medicine. It basically was a lifetime certification. It was a one and done type thing. Once you, kind of like the bar exam for a lawyer, once you completed that level of expertise, you were considered that type of specialist in medicine. If you wanted to go on and subspecialize, you could also take another specialty exam in that area of specialty. So as things went along, you could do this once in your lifetime. You'd be considered board certified in medicine or cardiology or oncology, whatever, and things were fine for a long time. Physicians had to, for their state licensure requirements, however, do continuing medical education. And so board certification became, the boards were decided basically to begin paying themselves. This was kind of a voluntary thing that started out as a way for doctors to show that they had these acceptable accolades for medicine. But the leadership of the boards realized there was a lot of time involved in creating these tests, basically wanted to make it a full-time job. And so back in the late 70s, early 80s, began to try to see if they could maybe create new sources of revenue and see if they could make maybe a super accolade that they could give to an internist. And that became the Advanced Achievement in Internal Medicine is what they called it. And they tried to give that test beginning in about 1980, I think it was, and to a fairly large number of internists. They had a 93% pass rate. And unfortunately, in subsequent years, when they tried to issue this test, fewer and fewer people were applying. And they realized this was not going to be a long-term solution for their financial crisis that they were encountering because they were running out of money. So what they did instead is said, you know what, we can't operate this way. We need to make these lifetime certifications, because there's only so many doctors out there. We're going to make them time limited. And therein began the issuance of time-limited boards beginning initially in 1986 for geriatric medicine, 1987 for critical care medicine, and 1990 for all other subspecialties in medicine. So now every 10 years in internal medicine subspecialties, we have to recertify. And they kind of got this idea from the family practice doctors who created their certification process in 1969, and theirs was always time limited. So, and they realized they were making a lot of cash, and the American Board of Internal Medicine wasn't doing quite so well.
Okay, let me just before you go on, of course, they are not saying that we are issuing time-limited certificates to make more money. You know, they are saying that they're issuing those because medicine has become more complicated, and when people are practicing, when they're, 10 years out from their residency training, if they're not careful, their skills will atrophy or their fund of knowledge will atrophy, and we can't rely on the continuing medical education, which sometimes can be gotten on the back of a cereal box, and therefore it's good to make the certification time limited and oblige the doctors who want to show that they are good achievers, that they have taken the exam again.
Doctors are really good achievers, that we know, okay? And they're very good at studying, and they're very good at taking tests. The problem is that this recertification process doesn't test what it really takes to be a doctor. I would argue that most of us want to be able to look somebody in the eye, make sure that they're somewhat honest, trustworthy, listen well, have good communication skills, have the ability to have a large fund of knowledge, know where to go if they don't know something, know how to consult people. Medicine is very different today than it used to be. We have access to the world's information in our hand with Google and many of the other information services that are out there. And the problem is that we had to do continuing medical education anyway. And you may say it's on the back of a cereal box, but there actually is an accreditation council for continuing medical education that has to approve continuing medical education to be viable for state licensure purposes. So now we're basically with the time-limited certification. Not only did they add in the educational things, but they also had us do exercises where we had to survey our own patients. We had to do quality assurance exercises above and beyond the educational stuff that we had to do, and they basically branded that as maintenance of certification. That's where the MOC, or maintenance of certification, brand name came from, and they actually licensed that trade name in 2007. And you're wondering, why did we have to do practice improvement modules? Why do we have to do all these other interesting things besides learn and do medical knowledge? And this is where the kind of social justice initiative of the American Board of Internal Medicine and the American Board of Medical Specialties came in. They wanted basically to kind of secretly behind the scenes, they're creating a large database to try and quantify how good or how much of a quality physician an individual is. And it's this piece of the whole puzzle that is not advertised at all, but deeply buried within our contract for doing maintenance of certification is a requirement that doctors participate in a HIPAA business associate agreement. And that agreement says that we have to share our data with a little known company called cecity.com. And cecity.com happens to be a subsidiary and was recently purchased by Premier Incorporated, one of the largest group purchase organizations in the United States, responsible for purchasing things for over 3,900 hospitals in the United States. So adding this information that ABIM doesn't tell you that's what they're doing to databases makes maintenance of certification quite lucrative for the American Board of Medical Specialties and their colleagues. So that's very interesting, Wes. I was not actually aware of that, despite the fact that I've been following, or I've tried to follow what's going on. There are so many different aspects to this problem. Right.
So when physicians have to, as part of the test or the maintenance of certification, when they have to turn in patient practice data about their patients and how they treat them and so forth. That goes into some database somewhere, and somebody uses that information for their own purpose.
Correct. And around 1990, the ABIM renovated their office space in Philadelphia. And much of that renovation was for computer infrastructure and computer storage areas. So again, this is all information that most people don't know, but those of us who've been kind of following the money have been looking into. And, you know, it was during that renovation that they had to disclose their art collection and things that they keep on the walls, and all the, you know, Rich Barron mentioned to me when I asked him about, and he's the president and CEO of the American Board of Internal Medicine. I called him up and said, hey, you know, how come you guys you bought a $2.3 million condominium for yourselves through your ABIM foundation? And he kind of stammered and hawed and said, you know, that's cheaper for us to put people up in a luxury condominium. That's where we put our Indian programmers who were coming in to integrate all this stuff. So, you know, he acknowledged that they were using a lot of infrastructure reprogramming and things. And then we found that the ABIM is also funneling that data to the American Board of Medical Specialties, who actually sells it to third parties under a little known company called ABMS Solutions Limited. And that's based out of Atlanta, Georgia. And so people subscribe to get daily updates to how your board certification status is doing. And of course, who wants that more than insurance companies that would like to deny payments? So if you expire your board certification, the insurance company almost instantly knows the fact that you have lost your certification and are more than happy to deny a payment to your patient. So this is a very complicated, undisclosed collusion, if you will, that's going on between insurance companies. It's also very helpful for hospitals that want to employ physicians rather than allow them to be independent practitioners, because they can use it as a cudgel to make sure that they stay in line. And so it's a big mess.
Wes, how has it happened over the decades, I guess, that the professional organizations that were supposed to represent us have been, or at least seem to be, so complicit with whatever the ABIM seems to want to do? Like, I'm continuously stunned that the same organization, you know, the AMA that, you know, stood strongly against Medicare in 1965. I mean, it seemed like organizations, at least back in the day, were very, very much in tune with, or needed to be in tune with, the practicing physicians. And I don't know how it's happened, but, you know, the decade or so set, and in the 50 years or so since, you know, whatever the MOC, whatever the ABIM seems to suggest and say, we in general seem to go along with. Would you agree with that? And if you do agree with that, why has that happened, or how has that happened?
Well, I do agree with it, and I think that's part of the dismay that I've felt in this, bringing this to the attention of my own specialty society. The first people I reached out to in December of 2014, when I broke the story about the ABIM's condominium, was Mr. Youngblood, who happened to be the president and CEO or the executive officer of the Heart Rhythm Society. And I never really heard anything back from him. I was very naive at the time, thinking this was just, you know, it was such an appalling finding that they would have this condominium for themselves, basically paid for with our recertification fees. You know, but I had no idea at the time in 2014 the depth and breadth of the number of people who have really used these fees, which are substantial across the entire American Board of Medical Specialties. This is a $1 billion a year enterprise when you look at all of the different players involved. And who?
So for the audience, per physician, how much does that amount to? Well,
you know, the Annals did a study looking at for the general internist, it's about $23,000 in direct and indirect costs every 10 years. And for a subspecialist like myself, that may even reach as high as $100,000 every 10 years. When you consider both the direct and indirect costs, that being time away from work, time to travel to the testing center, to take the test, to study for the test, to take a board review course, all those things factor into those costs. So it's an extremely expensive endeavor for physicians to undergo. And unfortunately, our specialty societies are complicit because they make an awful lot of money on these board review courses. At the time I took my board review course, last one in 2013, just before I kind of understood what was in part of that, taking it for the last time was what inspired me to speak out against it. It was just so cumbersome and arduous and time consuming. And it really took away from, here I am trying to take care of people's lives, and I've got these crazy surveys I'm supposed to be doing on patients, and it was just crazy. So anyway, that really inspired me to push back against this. And so
okay, so tell us about what you did and what sort of 2014. You reached the tipping point. You discovered the condominium.
I'd had enough. Right, I'd had enough. It was crazy. I was just like, you got to be kidding me. So I talked with, I started writing about this on my blog, and all of a sudden, the next thing I know, everybody's talking about it and furious and saying this is crazy. And from different parts of the country, Paul Tierstein put up this survey asking people, hey, what do you think about this, and is it worthwhile? And what if we created another organization? And 23,000 doctors signed on to that survey, which, by the way, you can't find on the internet anymore. But he paid for the survey, for the questionnaire to be out there and have people sign up for it. And I'm sure he got a very healthy email list from that, and that was helpful. So
he's a cardiologist in San Diego,
right.
In the San Diego area, and a prominent cardiologist, had been well known, and so he decided to try to have a competing board organization.
That's correct. Yeah, the National Board of Physicians and Surgeons, which he created, and along with very prominent other academic physicians from across the country, from Mayo and New York and Brigham and a lot of other large names, and so. They were actually, and then he was asked to give a point-counterpoint piece in the New England Journal of Medicine. And I think that that really launched the credibility of the counterattack against the American Board of Medical Specialties. But he has had a very hard time having that organization recognized by insurers and hospitals across the country. He's less than 100 hospitals will recognize his organization currently. And that's because the ABMS has lobbied on multiple levels, different organizations, to make sure that theirs is the single accrediting body.
So tell us about that, because I think that's probably the most critical aspect of this whole
right.
Whole issue is so how is ABMS influencing all insurance companies and hospitals and so forth to maintain its monopoly on the board certification process?
Well, the ABMS is a member board of the Accreditation Council on Graduate Medical Education. They are one organization. The AMA is another. The American Hospital Association is another. The Association of American Medical Colleges is another. The Joint Commission on Accreditation of Hospital Organizations all form this large kind of umbrella organization called the ACGME, or Accreditation Council on Graduate Medical Education. And therefore, they are very influential, and they all work together, because it is a large umbrella organization. The AMA, as we know, really only represents about 15% of practicing physicians today, and has many conflicts of interest that have developed because they own the coding scheme that all the electronic medical records use. So, and they make a ton of money from copyright and the sale of the permissions to use that coding scheme. to the electronic medical record companies. They also sell insurance and malpractice insurance to doctors, and so they have multiple streams of revenue, and many of which do not represent maybe a physician's first interest, who it's actually in practice. But nonetheless, they are the political speaking voice for physicians in the United States, so we can't ignore that. And they do have value. I'm not trying to say there is no value to the American Medical Association. I think they've done some good things for driving healthcare policy in the United States. And not all of it is bad. But I think we have to recognize that there are problems that have been generated from, and really the ABIM and ABMS both came from the AMA. I mean, they actually were a spinoff from that organization. So this has been a long-term process for years with board certification. But what is different is they made this change from lifetime certification to time limited. And that allowed hospitals then to not have to change their bylaws at all. They just said we have to have a board certified physician. It was perfect for them, because then even though they wanted to have a board certified physician, if you change the rules and say, well, gosh, you haven't redone your stuff, you're no longer board certified, those physicians can lose their right to work at that hospital. And likewise, an insurance company says we only use board certified physicians. If they don't recertify, they can lose their time on an insurance panel. So,
and let's explain why that's in the interest of the insurance companies and the hospitals to put that kind of pressure on doctors.
Well, if you own the market, remember when doctors used to be out in the real world and have their own practices, and if a hospital wasn't behaving nicely to the doctor's patients, a doctor could send his patients to another hospital right around the corner, and it would not be a problem. All of a sudden the hospital would have to kind of rethink what their policies were, because all of a sudden they lost the real money, which were the patient and the flow that was coming into their facility. So I happen to be old enough that I was board certified lifetime in internal medicine, but crossed the border in 1990 to where I have to recertify in cardiology and cardiac electrophysiology. So I still remember those times. And, it was also very clever that they grandfathered anybody that was boarded before 1990. You didn't have to recertify, and that still holds true today. So those older physicians can still continue to bill and can still continue to be on hospital insurance panels. And it worked to these organizations' favor, because they didn't have any pushback from the older guys who were more likely to be influential. Younger doctors today, they're so scared of losing their job and not being able to work as an employed physician somewhere. Right. They'll do anything.
So it matches the trend of physicians, having to depend on the hospital, and hospitals having the upper hand and employing the physicians. Right. And likewise with insurance companies, who actually would rather have fewer physicians in the marketplace, because
absolutely,
if there are fewer physicians in the marketplace, there's less utilization of healthcare and so forth.
Yeah. Wes, what do you see? What do you see as the you started among many things you started a GoFundMe page for legal work. Could you explain what exactly you're doing there?
Yeah. Right. Well, we first, I realized this is not a Wes Fisher fight. This is really U.S. practicing physician fight. Because of the work that I've been writing about and things, got together with a number of other doctors, and we created an organization called Practicing Physicians of America, which basically we don't have any funding except for membership from other physicians. We are not sponsored by corporate interests at the present time. We have applied as a 501c6, which allows us to lobby Congress and to serve as a business league for practicing physicians. So that's what we want to be. And we're still waiting to hear from the IRS, but we expect that we will get that approval soon. And then we also started a GoFundMe page so that we could begin to do background research on legal efforts to combat this regulatory capture that has occurred with board certification.
We'll put all this on the show notes. It'll be at accountandcoca.com/episode 17. We'll have all the links to all these different organizations.
What would you say was the biggest stumbling block that you've found? Like what's the rate limiting step that you found?
Physician apathy. I think absolutely. What I really think is happening is the doctors don't believe they can win anymore. They don't believe that we have the ability to go out and actually compete against these multi-billion-dollar entities that have us locked down with this particular process. And I think the American Board of Internal Medicine feels quite confident that they have a lot of backing from industry associates that they've been working with for years. And for that reason, I think physicians think, why do I want to waste my money putting, kind of throwing this into the bin? But there's a new thing that's happened in the legal world lately, and it's specifically designed for underdogs. And that's the use of litigation funders. And when I was I showed some of the tax information from the ABIM to a federal judge here in Chicago because I couldn't find a legal team in Chicago that did not have a conflict with the American Medical Association. They use them all, so that therefore, if you try to go in and combat against, the large law firms all have business dealings with the American Medical Association, so therefore, those law firms can't help you, and that's very helpful for the AMA and not real helpful for the little guy. So I went to a federal judge and asked her, I said, who, if you had this problem, she happened to be married to one of my colleagues. And I said, how would you do this? And she said, well, send me the stuff you have and let me look at it and see if I might have somebody that I could refer you to. And so I sent her the packet of information that I'd accumulated much for the Ohio testimony that I'd given for the anti-MOC bill there. And she got right back to me the next day and said, oh my God, do you have a lot of stuff here? And she said, I think I know the guy. Let me give him a call. I'll reach out to him. And then if and you mind if I send him this packet? And I said, no, go ahead. It's already public information. And she did. And the next thing you know, we communicated. And so here we are. We are now raising funds to do pre-litigation investigation into the antitrust and the fraud aspects of what the ABIM did to develop their regulatory capture of physicians. We have a very strong, believe we have a very strong case for both fraud and other things that are going on, particularly in the antitrust area. The antitrust implications are much broader than today. The AOA had to settle their antitrust issues with osteopaths because they tied it to AOA membership and had to settle. But the reality is that we're going to go much further, and the people who may be involved are the insurers and hospitals and everybody. So there is a deep pocket that the lawyers are very interested in tapping. I think it has a great potential to move forward.
That's great. But just to be clear, so the nature of the claim would be that the boards have maneuvered to try to maintain their monopoly, right? They've maneuvered with hospitals, with insurance companies, and so forth. There was at some point when the doc fix bill came out, there seemed to be, and I haven't followed, evidence that they had maneuvered Congress as well to insert language about. Did that happen?
Well, there is. I don't know what happened with or which bill you're speaking about specifically. I can tell you for the Accountable Care Act, obviously the American Board of Medical Specialties heavily lobbied Congress to make sure that maintenance of certification was a quality metric in the ACA law. Mm-hmm. So that's all incorporated in there already. And so that's, and we've got the letters that they sent to the congressman and all that kind of stuff.
And you'll appeal to the Sherman Antitrust Act, or okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So, you know, and I think the bigger issue here is the fraud aspects. The amount of tax fraud that we believe has happened has been substantial. And along with the tax fraud came all of the false claims that are going on about how this stuff improves patient care and the public needs it and all this kind of stuff. That basically is nothing more than propaganda. Most of the public doesn't know anything about board certification.
Is it helpful or is it distracting to have, in a way, two separate claims? One, the antitrust, and the other one is the fraud issue, or the misuse of funds and that sort of thing.
Well, I think that I really can't disclose exactly how we're going to go about this because it's actually been quite interesting to discuss. But let's just say that things are moving very quickly, and there's a lot more meat being put on the bone currently than even I was aware of. So I think that it's actually a pretty exciting effort. I didn't really think we could do this because when I walked into the lawyer's office, they looked at me and they said, you know, you don't have enough money for this. And I said, well, I get it. I mean, I'm just a doctor, you know, one guy, and they looked at the scope of what we're you know, what I'm talking about. And I said, well, thanks for giving me the time. I really appreciate it. I just wanted to see if you thought there was some legitimacy to this. And I was about to walk out and they said, wait a minute. We might have a way you could fund this. And for the first time, when they told me about the litigation funders and how they work, and that these guys, this is what they do, and they love underdog cases, I was like, I finally felt like maybe there's a chance we could actually do this. So it was a very exciting time. I walked out of there. I hadn't felt that good in 4 years after writing about this forever. I was feeling quite defeated. But honestly, I think that I feel about as good as I've ever felt in this fight. And I wish I could convey that. Maybe this podcast will help do that to the other physicians out there. That there really is a way to do this.
We are happy to play our parts as much as possible.
Wes, would you say that there's sorry, Michelle, would you say that you know, lots of physicians, young, old, etc., are you know, yearly plopping down money for the ACC or the whatever dermatology board, whatever you know, ABMS boards there are? Would you say a better use of their funds would be to not go along with that and to fund you instead?
You know, I don't want to make anybody have to lose their job. And unfortunately, that's where people are right now. But if they didn't send money to their, I don't send money to the ACC anymore. Okay.
Yeah. Well, what's the?
And I stopped going to the HRS meeting for 1 year, but I rejoined only because socially it's the only social activity I have with any of my colleagues. But I think that I would encourage people, if they have room to move in that area, certainly, you know, and we're not asking a lot of money. We're talking, you know, one nice night out with your wife, if you know, for about that same, you know, $100 is not too much for most physicians to be able to cough up. What I've been impressed by, we don't even have 600 physicians so far in 2 months of asking for money for this effort. And that's very disappointing. I sent out an email and we did a survey and it showed that 8% of doctors who undergo maintenance of certification felt harmed from the process. And that translated to 394 doctors out of 7,007 that we heard back from in our survey. And that was telling. And the type of harms were very broad-based, from people losing their job, having to relocate, people losing their ability to take insurance payments, and one of the largest were the psychological impacts to a physician that no one talks about how humiliating this is for physicians if they were to fail something after practicing for 10 years. These are not slackers. These are people who work, take call 24 hours a day, worked their fannies off and have done so to keep practicing and take care of patients. And that's really what we're talking about here. We're not talking about somebody who can pass a test, for goodness sakes. So unfortunately, the boards want us to think that the test is equivalent to caring for patients, and there's just no way we can equate the two.
I agree with you, and I agree that I think if we can show what you just described about you're being hopeful with this litigation process is very important to broadcast, and we'll try to do our part to spread the word, because I suspect that that you're right, that people feel or have felt that this effort is fruitless,
right?
And I hope they'll be encouraged to find out that it is not. And no matter what, I think people should fight back because, it's the cure to burnout. Everybody's burnt out, and it doesn't get better by just, crawling into your corner or finding other distractions. I mean, this is our professional life. We need to find it exciting. We need to fight for a good cause. So I certainly have contributed to your fund, and I will encourage everybody else to do the same.
I just feel like it's a failure of, the little representative democracy that we have, right? Meaning if for instance, if the ACC, why is the ACC not saying something more strongly? Why is HRS
I'll tell you why, because I think, they engage in the same kinds of things that I think Wes was alluded to. So
I know why. I know why, but they will not sing the same tune if the rank and file abandons them, right? If the next ACC meeting has 3/4 the attendance it had last year, I can guarantee you there's going to be some, there's going to be some, noises coming from the top. But, instead we go along, there's this, I keep seeing these tweets from, and I'm targeting the ACC. I don't mean to target the ACC. I'm a cardiologist, so that's why I'm targeting them. But I see these meaningless tweets from the ACC about legislative agendas and, let's all meet in Ohio and let's all meet here and let's do what. And I send a tweet back to them saying, what exactly are you advocating for? No response. So I feel like a lot of ACC legislative stuff, and it is some like giant camp that they go to and socialize, and it is they're not understanding that they're there to represent the rank and file for meaningful stuff, and there's nothing more meaningful right now. Well, sorry, there's few things that are more meaningful right now for the practicing physician than the stuff with certification.
Right. But the bottom line is that I think just like the AMA, they have found sources of revenues that don't depend on having a broad membership. So even if they lose members, they have their databases, their quality databases, the NCDR, the Heart Rhythm Society has a similar thing for, these registries. They have other ways of getting income. And so for the time being, I don't see them. I really don't see them responding to the needs of the individual.
No, when you figure that an individual hospital pays them $40,000 a year for access to a single NCDR database, wow, that's a pretty good chunk of change, and who needs doctors when you have that? And do you see anybody pushing back about the plethora of nurse practitioners that are invading hospitals? Today I made rounds, and there's a nurse practitioner in the ICU managing one of our patients. I'm like, where's the ICU attending? Well, it's a lot cheaper to pay a nurse practitioner, who doesn't have nearly the training to sit in the ICU and manage patients on a day-to-day basis. So, and they don't have to do this maintenance of certification hoopla, so from a business standpoint, if I was a hospital, I'd be like, heck yeah, let's get more nurse practitioners in here because they're cheaper. And, I think really that's what's going on. We're seeing primary care doctors and other specialists being replaced by less educated and experienced individuals. And this whole thing plays very much into the hospital's hands and insurance companies' hands.
Yeah.
But I agree with Michelle that the ACC now is turning into the AMA with their databases. They found their money pipeline here, and it's sure isn't doctors. Just look at our GoFundMe page. Doctors are tough to extract money from, but boy, a hospital system that wants data or an insurance company that wants data, man, they got money to spend, and it's a very lucrative playbook by which to go by.
Of course. Well, Wes, I'm very encouraged by everything that I've been hearing today from you. Frankly, I went into this conversation here thinking, well, maybe this is a chaotic mission here, but this is great. This is great. I share your enthusiasm. I'll continue to support you. Before we wrap up, Anish, did you have any other questions on this topic?
I don't. Yeah, go ahead, Anish. Yeah, go ahead.
I wonder just to clarify, the litigation that's ongoing, that is dependent on funding from the GoFundMe stuff, or this litigation thing has separate funding that you're able to get from the eventual suit, or how does it work?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because I didn't know much about it either. This initial part is strictly the investigation and to write the claims. The issues about the claims is you don't want to get them dismissed in court. Okay, they need to go to discovery. Once they go to discovery, everybody's wants to settle right away. Or if they take it to court, they're gonna try and drag it out as long as they can. We probably will not get funding until such time as an actual suit is filed. But once it's filed, then the potential to get litigation funding exists. And because then you have all the terms of the litigation already, and you know who the players are, and you know who's what. So we've been very careful not to disclose who the litigants are and who the legal team is at the current time. For that reason, that will only be disclosed once the filing is made. Suffice it to say that in the terms of the litigation, obviously, are very important. How many claims, how many complaints, that kind of thing. I really can't share at this time, but suffice it to say, there's plenty of meat for the bone, and I think that as we've gone on in this process, we're already working with the team. They've agreed to cap the funds for themselves to the GoFundMe amount that we've talked about, and that will suffice. I would love to see our GoFundMe way exceed that, because there will be additional funds needed after the filing for the legal team to move it forward and put it before legal funders, that kind of thing. So the litigation funding is going to be an issue, but I think it's very doable, particularly given what we know about the complaint at the current time.
That's great.
That's great. Very important information. Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to highlight one thing. One of the things that the ABIM and Rich Barron do say in response, in rebuttal, is that the public wants the certification. The public wants this notion of quality, right? But as you saw, as we all see who are practicing, and as Wes just said, no one's asking for nurse practitioners who are essentially taking over.
We lost Anish.
Oh, that's okay. You hear me?
I hear you.
Oh, you hear me? Oh, yep. We lost Michelle.
Oh no, he's frozen in time.
Anyhow, for the podcast, just no one's, this whole rebuttal that the public wants this quality is kind of laid waste by the proliferation of physician extenders and NPs that are all out there, and they don't have MOC certification. And is the public clamoring for some type of MOC certification for them? I'm sure these guys will eventually figure it out and expand some type of lower level thing to them. But this expansion of service delivery is happening certainly without them. So.
Right. Absolutely. And I think that we're seeing that more and more.
Yeah.
But I think doctors should feel encouraged. This is not a Quixote type,
right.
Don Quixote thing going after windmills. We're actually trying to, and we've got a good team behind us with the board members of the PPA. So it should work out.
Wonderful and just amazing, tireless work. I don't know how you do it. So thanks.
Wes, where can
so
people, you want to shout out some links where people can follow you, and then I'll have those on our show notes.
Sure. The Dr. Wes blog is a good place to start. HTTP // drwest.blogspot.com. You've got the GoFundMe. Actually, practicingphysicians.org is also a good place to go.
Your Twitter handle?
And my Twitter handle is at Dr. D-O-C-T-O-R West, W-E-S, all one word, is my Twitter handle. So that's a good place to follow if you want to learn more. I think that the timeline for what we're talking about is, unfortunately, I've got a little summer break coming for the lawyers soon. But we're hoping around Labor Day to be able to have the first rough draft of the full complaint to take a look at, and we'll see what it'll be up to the board whether we need to revise and you know, and then the timing of filing if we decide to go forward will be up to us at that point. But it's there's plenty of information to be had, and certainly it's a very, very complex story. Part of the challenge that the legal team has is keeping it simple enough so a judge doesn't just say, forget it, I'm not going to get involved in this. So that's, I have to trust the people that we're working with. These people are not rookies. They've done this before. So this should be an interesting time.
Wes, thank you so much.
Oh, you bet,
Thanks
guys.
for spending time with us.
Oh, and thanks for having me on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thanks.